This is Charlotte Talks. I'm Mike Collins. On the local news roundup, money is approved for running the rail trail along the Silver Line and for updated security at CMPD facilities. City Council at-large candidates participate in a Charlotte Talks candidate forum opposite the final TV debate between the Dans in the 9th District. Donald Trump Jr. comes to Charlotte to support Dan Bishop, while Joe Biden, who is in Rock Hill this week, as well as Charlotte, endorses Dan McCready. We're a year out from hosting the 2020 Republican National Convention, so the RNC takes a bus tour of the state, and our Board of Elections talks about voting machines and security for the 2020 election. Our roundtable of reporters is set to detail those and other stories, and those reporters include Steve Harrison from WFAE News. Good morning. Welcome.
Thank you.
Joe Bruno is here. He's a reporter for WSSC-TV Channel 9 Eyewitness News. Thank you for joining us.
Hey, Mike.
And Eric Spanberg is back, managing editor of the Charlotte Business Journal. He was just here on Wednesday.
That's right. Good morning, Mike.
Welcome. We're all on the radio, and you can find us on Facebook Live as well. So Charlotte City Council approved money for two things on Monday night. Funds for a study. I misstated that in the opening. A study of a proposal to run the rail trail along the planned light rail Silver Line, and money for beefed up security at CMPD locations, including its headquarters uptown. So let's start there. Last year, police killed a man who tried to ambush them outside their uptown headquarters on East Trade Street. That was in January of 2018. What took them so long to get money for security?
That's a good question. You know, I had not heard a lot about this over a long span. I don't know if I missed that part, but now they're going to take some steps, $950,000 okayed by the council to expand the CMPD lobby, including bulletproof doors and windows by the end of this year, and a new waiting area. By the way, waiting area seems like a euphemistic term for a police station, but anyway.
This is long overdue. I mean, think about it. You can't go to the Showmars in the government center without going through some form of security. And back in 2018, you could walk into the police headquarters willy-nilly. Now, of course, you have to buzz in to enter the building. But I think once you're inside that building, there's really nothing in there.
But this ambush took place in the parking lot. What's that got to do with beefing up security in the building at headquarters and all the other stations?
I'm not sure about that part, but I do think, like Joe's saying, it is amazing that, you know, it's still pretty open, or has been pretty open until very recently.
Right. There are two police officers who sit in the lobby, basically, behind a desk with little to no protection. So, you know, I think anything they can do, the bulletproof windows, the bulletproof doors, is a big help.
And they're doing this at all the stations, or just the uptown headquarters?
This money is just for the uptown headquarters.
But they do have $500,000 for improved electronic security systems at the other stations, so they are taking steps there as well.
Correct.
Okay, so that's $950,000. Is that what it was?
Yes.
Correct.
Okay. Meanwhile, money was approved to study putting a pedestrian and bike trail along the proposed Silver Line light rail line. And the Silver Line is only in someone's imagination at the moment. So why do they need a study? Why don't you just build it along the trail, along the line? Just do it.
I think that, you know, part of it is probably the rail trails, the existing one in the south end, you know, it's pretty wide, right? Like there's a lot of extra land you'd have to buy. You know, I think the study is going to look at how much more land you'd have to acquire, how much that would cost. I think it's interesting because if you go back to when they were building the first light rail line, no one talked about a rail trail. It was just like it's just kind of this thing that's grown kind of organically and is arguably the most popular part of the whole light rail system is that trail. And
remember sorry, Steve, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but just real quickly, that bridge that I assume y'all talked about last week, the bridge spanning uptown and south end,
277.
That's all to connect the rail trail. So that's another example of how well it's worked. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, we did talk about that. Go ahead, Steve.
No, I mean, I just think that you know, I think it's a smart move. If you're going to build the Silver Line, would probably be, like you said, go from Matthews and through uptown to the airport and possibly to Belmont. It's probably a $3 billion. What's the latest? We don't really know the full number, but $3 billion.
Yeah, it's probably in that range.
And so it makes sense. And I think that what they're talking about, they'd like to have the trail go the whole way, right?
And that's the other thing is, remember, as you look at the Silver Line now, it started off being a 13, 14-mile project. Now it's probably going to be 20 miles plus.
Yeah.
So you could really have quite an effective project if they can pull this off. And I think it was, about $200,000 combined when you take the city money, Matthews money and the Charlotte Regional Transportation Planning Organization.
That's a part of it I didn't know about. I had $175,000, part of it from Matthews, most of it from Charlotte, and I didn't know about the third part there. But when we talk about a study, it's not a bunch of people sitting in a room looking at maps. They send out surveyors and people like that, and
and like Steve is saying, it's a matter of the size and scope, and you're talking about a lot of areas where you already have things in existence, so you got to figure out how to make all this work.
Right. So
that's a technical explanation.
So when they do the study, I assume that they will be studying this from Matthews to Belmont, so they don't have to do another study if it goes to Belmont later on.
That would be my assumption as well. I don't know that 100%, but I'm assuming they're going to do the whole route.
Let's hope. Otherwise, we'll be talking about this again.
Put $1 in the jar.
2095 or something. All right. On Wednesday night, Charlotte Talks, this very program, hosted a candidate forum for all of the at-large city council candidates. 7 Democrats are running in this primary on September the 10th, for which early voting has already begun, and they're running for 4 seats, so only 3 of them will be eliminated. And the people on the panel on Wednesday night were, and I'll introduce them again in the order they will appear on the ballot: Dimple Ajmira, Julie Isolt, Jorge Miares, James Mitchell, Luana Slack Mayfield. That's why she's in that position on the ballot. Chad Stackowitz and Braxton Winston. We touched on 5 topics: affordable housing, crime, policing, the Republican convention, and the Panthers. Their thoughts on how the city should handle any request that may or may not come from David Tepper.
A lot of dodging on that question.
Yeah, yes. So did anything that anyone said get your attention?
One of the things that stood out to me is when you talk about Chad Stackowitz and Jorge Miares, that both of them answered questions in a manner of sort of wonkishness, data, analytics. I felt like that was again and again the way they approached answers. And I guess that was a way of trying to not only play off their business backgrounds, but also differentiate themselves, because most of these candidates have very similar views on almost all the topics.
I was impressed by Julie Isolt. I thought she had a good answer for the RNC. It was actually pretty interesting how she mentioned that at the time City Council was negotiating Honeywell. So that was one of her fears if the City of Charlotte all of a sudden rescinded the invitation for the RNC, that they might lose that major company. She also said that she thought the airport would be at risk if they pulled back the invitation.
And there wasn't time to explain that for newcomers who were listening, because we really had to keep these answers very short. But the airport being in jeopardy stems from the legislature's attempt to try to take the airport from Charlotte just after they had taken the water system in Asheville from that city. And that was a legitimate concern back then, and probably still is.
Yeah, and that was in 2013 that most of that was going on with the legislature. And I can't remember if it was Julie Isolt. I think it was Julie Isolt who was also saying that the mayor had really improved relationships. That was maybe regarding taking control of the housing issue. But you're right, that was interesting. I also thought the other thing regarding your Republican National Convention question is that there were not just Julie, but several people said, well, I felt like I was approached in a one-on-one situation. It wasn't a public vote in terms of the initial bid, and so I said, okay, we'll have the conversation. So I don't know if there's a little bit of revisionism or second.
To what you said about revisionist history, going back to January 2018, the mayor meets with all the council members. The way it's been presented to the public is that Luana Mayfield was the only one who said absolutely not. At the Charlotte Talks debate this week, Dimple Ajmira said, I was opposed to it at the time, back in January, which, it's kind of been presented to us, is that she was on board, or at least didn't object. Braxton Winston also kind of said at that time, at the very beginning, that he wasn't keen on it either. Now,
There's this issue that bubbled up, Mike. Of course, you were there, so you heard all this. But the issue that sort of surfaced was that council members felt as though they should at least entertain the idea, even if their gut reaction was, I don't want this in the city. And then it progressed to the point that there was really no point of return. Again, there's probably some revisionism in there, but there's also, I think, a kernel or two of truth in that you could see how you could start to go down the road of, well, we shouldn't just immediately say we won't bid for this, and then it begins to progress, nobody else bids, and all of a sudden you find yourself, okay, which way are you going?
And this is, I think, an issue with city government all the time, is that the process on any issue gets started, and then staff works on it for a few months, and then it comes before the council, and then there's this idea of like, well, we can't say no now.
Yeah.
Because we've already started, and so it's like...
Economic development works like that a lot.
So it's the tale of the dog chasing the car, and he actually gets the car and doesn't know what to do with it.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly right, Mike. And I think the other thing that was going on is, remember, January 2018, you're starting to talk about the convention. Nobody really knows, even though there's all this controversy with President Trump and divisive rhetoric, nobody knows that no other city, in essence, is going to say, I want this. So
Didn't we know at some point? Didn't we know
we
that?
We did later on. We didn't know in January of 2018.
Right.
And so I think a lot of people on council may have said, well, we throw in a bid.
Right.
Who knows if it ever comes here.
Another interesting topic that unfortunately you didn't have a whole lot of time to dive into was the Non-Discrimination Ordinance. You went down the line and asked if they would be in favor of passing another one despite everything that happened. Every single person on that stage said yes.
And this is because at the end of 2020, December 31st, 2020, the prohibition set in place by the legislature because of what happened here goes away. They have prohibited any municipality from enacting any ordinance like Charlotte enacted until January 1st, 2021.
That was part of that partial repeal.
So I asked everybody, if you're on council, will you try to do it? Put it back in place? Yes, every one of them.
And if
Here comes HB 2.0, 2.1.
Right. And the thing I thought there is, assuming that conventional wisdom plays out, Mayor Vilas or whoever is mayor, that's a big challenge for you because, the likelihood is in a Democratic city, you're probably going to get several of those people on council, and they all want to revisit this. We know that will not be an easy conversation.
But one thing about that, at the end of 2020, like you said, the moratorium goes away. Mm-hmm. But the one piece of it that stays in place is local governments cannot pass any rules about bathrooms. That stays. So the city council could pass an ordinance like kind of the non-discrimination, you can't deny service, et cetera, but the whole, really the heart of HB2 over transgender bathroom access, that's still, the city still can't go there. So in a way, that's going to make it easier in 2 years for them to pass this because the most controversial thing is off the table.
And another important topic that you asked about was the Panther Stadium. I don't think a lot of people have this issue on their radar, but it is going to be an issue for this next city council.
It's coming.
And aside from James Mitchell, the rest of the council members on that stage kind of danced around the question.
Yes,
Mitchell was
did.
gung-ho, I'm going to use the tourism fund. You don't want to be on a city council that loses a professional sports franchise.
Several of them, including Julie Eisel, wanted to know what the contract looked like. Of course, there is no contract.
There is no contract.
And James Mitchell's answer was the most honest of everyone on there because, James wears the Panthers jersey to council meetings sometimes. He really supports the team. Yeah. And it's like, I'm going to do it. And I think that's
in
to his
truth.
Credit.
Do we have a choice? I'm serious about this. Do you really have a choice?
No, I don't think so.
There is one Republican, by the way, who should be mentioned. He's running at large, but there's no primary for him. That's why he wasn't invited to be part of this. It was the Democratic primary. But the people who win in this primary go on to November. Given our demographics, aren't they likely to win?
By the way, Mike, last time
now?
we had a Republican elected at large 10 years ago, Edwin Peacock.
Wow. Do you think people realize that the voting in this primary is all important if you care about city council?
I don't think enough, so you should keep saying it.
Okay. It's all important, folks. It's also all important that you stick around. We're going to talk about the 9th District debate, which was on opposite us on Wednesday night. We're coming right back on Charlotte Talks. Support for Charlotte Talks comes from WFAE members and Chow Chow Festival, celebrating the culinary and artisan makers around the community's table with food, beverage, crafts, and seminars. September 13th through 15th in downtown Asheville's Pack Square Park. More at chowchowasheville.com. And Duke Energy, using carbon-free energy sources to meet 50% of the Carolinas' energy needs, and committed to continuing to lower emissions. More at duke-energy.com/get more facts. Well, Monday on this program, it's Labor Day. A lot of people will be at the beach, and so you can join us on the app or wherever and listen to our program about sharks. Are you afraid of them? Have they kept you out of the water? Despite the scary headlines and a handful of tragic cases of shark attacks, your chances of being bitten are incredibly low. In fact, we're more of a threat to them than they are to us by volumes. And we'll hear from shark expert William McKeever about the ocean's most mysterious creatures Monday at 9.
The number of Democratic presidential candidates is still in the double digits, but the pool continues to shrink. President Trump is taking questions about hosting world leaders at his resort near Miami, and Barbie celebrates her 60th birthday with a tribute to some inspiring women. The Friday News Roundup next time on 1A.
The Roundup of the Week's news continues at 10 o'clock with 1A here on listener-funded 90.7 WFAE, Charlotte's NPR news source.
It's Charlotte Talks on listener-funded 90.7 WFAE and 90.3 WFHE. I'm Mike Collins. It's the local news roundup that explains the presence of Joe Bruno from Channel 9, WSSC-TV, Eric Spanberg from the Charlotte Business Journal, and Steve Harrison from WFAE News. I want to mention one more thing about the primary, particularly the city council primary. It is all important because it's very likely that the winners in the primary will be the winners in November. So if you care, you vote now. As well as November, but you certainly vote now. And if you need to hear our program, our hour-long discussion with these 7 candidates, you can go to WFAE.org and listen to it there, or you can download the podcast.
Mike, can I mention just real quickly, because you had a question about affordable housing was one of your topics, and I thought it was really interesting. You pressed them a little bit about the idea of having greater local control. And the optimism. What was it? A ghost of a prayer?
Yeah, ghost of a chance.
A ghost of a chance.
We have very little. We have very few tools that the city has at their disposal to mandate. It can't mandate affordable housing, and they'd like to go to the legislature and ask for some tools, and they haven't generally been very successful.
No, I mean,
everybody in the state has.
I think you were exactly right, and it was just interesting. Even in terms of the optimism with those candidates, they were dancing around it a little bit. Well, you have to be positive, but so anyway, it didn't sound like there was going to be a lot of movement in that area.
So opposite us at the same time, how dare they? For some time, the star attraction on the primary in September the 10th will be the 9th district race in some districts. I can't vote in this race because I'm not in the 9th district. Many people can. It's Pitt's Democrat Dan McCready against Republican Dan Bishop. They met in a final TV debate on WBTV on Wednesday night. It seemed to be a battle about who was mischaracterizing the other in the most egregious ways in their advertising. The Charlotte Observer called the meetup a fact checker's dream. What have the fact checkers had to say?
I think that the biggest point of contention during the debate was over a Dan Bishop vote from 2017 in the legislature about a bill that would give more doctors more leeway to prescribe lower-cost generic drugs. He had supported the bill, a companion bill, and then when it came before the Senate, he said he was running the floor that day. It was very rushed. He wanted to make sure changes were in the bill, but he hadn't had time to read it, and so he voted no. It was the only person to vote no. And so the McCready campaign has been absolutely hammering him again and again, and he really got worked up, understandably, over that attack. Yeah, there was a lot of back and forth.
I recorded that debate, and I went home and watched it after we finished our conversation with the city council. And I thought, we live in an age of constant information. We live in Twitter and Facebook and all these things come into our phones all the time, and television networks devoted to news 24 hours a day. How much longer will it be effective to construct campaign ads that are demonstrably false?
Well, but Mike, I think that people are, in many cases, so overwhelmed by the glut of information that they tune a lot of it out, which I think is why political advertising continues to work to some degree. I mean, look, we're talking about fake news all the time, and people are in their silos.
I have a rule of thumb about that. If somebody calls it fake news, it's absolutely the truth.
That's a good maxim, actually. But, when you have people who are in echo chambers a lot of times politically, I think it's very difficult to sort these things out, or at least, I shouldn't say it's very difficult. People are reluctant to go to sources that they don't trust or that they don't agree with or that they think are somehow skewed.
What kind of stood out to me was what didn't come up in the debate. There was no mention about HB2. When the candidates had their chances to ask each other questions, I think they both missed a huge opportunity. Bishop asked about election fraud, which is in Dan McCready's wheelhouse, and McCready asked the same question about that health care the bill that Bishop voted for, the companion bill, that he had already brought up many times in the debate before, and Bishop just had another chance to reiterate what he said in the past.
Now, I think Joe is exactly right. I mean, I was stunned at both of those. I almost think that in the case of Senator Bishop, maybe he outthought himself because it was a tricky question, except for the fact that voter fraud is something that I wouldn't think you wanted to bring up, considering what happened with Mark Harris.
The question was about because in Bladen County, we know that McCrae Dallas was collecting mail ballots on behalf illegally or allegedly illegally doing that. But the Democrats, the Republicans feel like Democrats were also doing the same. So Bishop had asked McCready what steps did he take to make sure that didn't happen. And so I think it's a really interesting question, kind of as an attorney, as a journalist, but in this debate format,
you hear election fraud, then you pivot to your talking points.
It totally boomeranged on him. And the fact that, and Mike, the jar's not here, unfortunately, but the fact that you could get through that debate without HB2, I mean, that is just stunning. Has there ever been, or not ever, but in the last 5 years, have we had a state law that has gotten more attention than that one? Absolutely not. And yet, the author of that bill is on stage running for Congress, and neither one of the candidates brings it up.
So these are really tricky things, these debates, these candidate debates, particularly the ones that are on television, but even to a certain degree, the ones that are on radio, because it's about content, bringing your content to the table and being the one that wins the content battle. But it's also about performance. And I think, I don't know which one won or lost, content or performance in that debate.
I didn't learn anything new about the candidate position, so that would make me lean performance. I was also a little surprised that we mentioned McCready didn't bring up HB2. Bishop didn't really bring up liberal politicians, and he's had that ad on the air for several months now. I don't think I heard AOC or Ilhan Omar, any of those names mentioned during the debate. I think he mentioned Elizabeth Warren once, maybe, but other than that,
you would have thought the Representative Omar donation that was returned by the McCready campaign, you would have thought that would have been brought up. I am assuming, I have not heard an answer on this, I'm assuming that, for example, Dan McCready didn't bring up HB2 because he worried that would, alarm possible Republican voters moving over to his side in a district that leans Republican. But as I say, I think there was just some overthinking going on both those candidates.
All these parties and all these candidates and all their the campaign staff do these polls. They know what's going on behind the scene. Could it be that the liberal word, the L word, is beginning to change? It used to be a scary word. Given the fact that most Democrats now identify themselves as liberal, and there are more Democrats than there are Republicans, could they be backing off the use of the liberal word because they know it doesn't work anymore?
Oh, you're talking about on the Republican side?
Yeah.
I don't know. I can't explain that.
I think they're kind of testing their messaging for 2020 because as much as this race is about the Dans, it's really about the Donald, and a lot of people are viewing this as a referendum on President Trump's presidency.
Well, they're getting a little indication of how this election may be going because early voting has been underway, and although we don't know who people are voting for, we do know that they're turning out.
That's right. So. Turnout compared to the November 2018 election is smaller, obviously, because this is a special. But among the people who voted early, there are more Democrats in the pool than there were at this time in 2018. So I think that there was when this race first started, I think I said it, maybe we all said it, there was a sense that there's no blue wave this time. There's no national blue wave. Dan McCready's on his own. Will that be enough in this red district? And it looks like from early voting that Democrats are still, like Joe said, this is all about the Donald. They're still motivated.
Yeah.
They're turning out.
The two candidates, the two Dans, sparred over health care, over big pharma. Big pharma kept coming up, and about the expansion of Medicaid. I thought it got a bit into the weeds, even for me. And because we do these shows, I read up a lot about this stuff. Do you think voters could follow that conversation or ferret out the truth? Because there were a lot of
I wonder,
partial truths being tossed about.
I mean, I think almost every time we get into healthcare policy, it goes downhill fast because it does get into the weeds and you get into these technicalities that I think are difficult for a lot of people to sort out unless you're really combing through this policy day after day.
They also spoke about immigration and about the decision of some North Carolina sheriffs, including Mecklenburgh County's Gary McFadden, to refuse to honor detainer requests from ICE. Bishop attacked that policy and alleged that Gary McFadden had let a violent criminal, a rapist, I believe, out of jail despite the retainer request. Is that true?
Yes, that is true. That is true. ICE has been making has been sending out news releases on that. Yes,
but now, did he let him out?
But
the argument from the sheriff's point of view, sheriffs all over the county, all over the state, who have decided not to cooperate. The argument has been to cooperate would be to break the law, because if somebody's not charged with something, they have to be let out of jail.
Right.
So,
the sheriff did not honor the detainer request, but the suspect met all the requirements that he was allowed to leave jail.
had the sheriff honored the detainer request, what would have happened?
ICE would have been able to pick the suspect up. There are arguments, though, that detainers are unconstitutional.
Okay. So, Bishop, because you have a right, there are laws surrounding detention.
Correct, yes.
All right. Bishop also brought up a woman I'd never heard of this woman, by the name of Lola Wooten, a Bladen improvement worker who allegedly dropped off bundles of absentee ballot mail request forms during the 2016 election, and he went into a complicated explanation that I found difficult to follow in the moment. He said, quote, she was paid by the Bladen County Improvement Association. The Bladen County Improvement Association was, in turn, paid by the federal account of the North Carolina Democratic Party, and the federal account was funded by your, meaning Dan McCready's, campaign. Can you explain, he asked, what steps you took to ensure that Lola Wooten wasn't harvesting ballots? McCready responded, if I'm right about this, because it was a little fuzzy, by expressing his horror over the election fraud that led to the overturning of the first election in the 9th District, and then said, quote, Dan Bishop is now trying to blame the Democrats for that. So, who is Lola Wooten? What did she allegedly do? Was she funded by the state Democratic Party? And since McCready didn't answer Bishop's question, what is the answer?
Lola Wooten came up a little bit during the hearing earlier this year on election fraud. The district attorney has all of those findings, and as of now, Lola Wooten hasn't been charged.
So is this a red herring, or is there something to this that
well, I mean, this goes back
down the road?
Well, this goes back to what we were talking about before, and Steve was saying, you know, there have been for years allegations on both sides, not just Republicans and Democrats in these counties. And I agree with Steve and Joe that it is perplexing that while that is an interesting question in another format, it's not in a debate because it immediately took people back to what happened with Mark Harris and McRae Dallas.
And speaking of early voting, we know something that's going on in Bladen County that didn't go on before, Steve.
Yeah, so in the early voting numbers that have come out so far, in Bladen County and Robeson County in the last election, there was a huge push on both parties to get people to vote absentee by mail, which was really the heart of the scandal. And so far, that has vanished almost. I mean, like, no one is doing it. I mean, if you go back to Robeson County, about 2 weeks before the election, there had been about 2,400 mail ballot requests in that county. On both sides. I think the last time I looked, there were 91. So it's gone back to the situation of actually people who are like, I'm actually out of town, that's why I'm going to request a mail ballot, as opposed to a political strategy. And the same thing in Bladen County. I think there was like 600 requests at this time. Now there's 45.
So, did you want to jump in here, Joe?
I was just going to say, while there is no absentee ballot drama in Bladen County, over in Robeson County, there is a little bit of dysfunction right now with the Board of Elections. One member had to resign because somebody filed a complaint against her for having Dan Bishop signs all over her yard. And 2 other members have hearings next week because someone alleges that they were in a photo with Dan McCready on Facebook.
I was going to bring that up. The Republican who had to resign from the board after it was discovered she had a Dan Bishop sign in her yard.
Multiple.
Olivia Oxendine. And then we have these 2 Democrats, Tiffany is it Pegues Powers?
Believe so.
And Karen Nancy, if that's right, if I've typed that right, appeared in a picture with Dan McCready. Isn't there a vast gulf in putting campaign signs in your yard or just happening to be in a picture? Isn't there just tell me, am I wrong about that?
They're supposed
Are there
to be
rules against that?
Yeah, they're supposed to be neutral. They are not
Right.
supposed
Of
to
course
take
they
any
are.
signs. And I could see how having yard signs in your front yard and being in a picture with Dan McCready can be interpreted as an endorsement.
By the way, was the picture? I didn't look closely at the picture. Was that at a campaign event?
It was a group photo. Looked like it was a fair
So-
elections rally somewhere in
So
Lumberton.
explain to me if these people are stupid or what. Because we just went through this year-long
I'm going to have to go
rigmarole.
A, but
We just went through this year-long thing with voter fraud or election fraud in Bladen County, and people on the Board of Elections are doing things like this. Are they out of their minds?
Don't understand it.
Okay. Both Dan Bishop and Dan McCready will appear on this program separately next Thursday. We'll give them equal time on this program next Thursday, so you'll have a chance to hear them once again on these various different issues. Meanwhile, Donald Trump Jr. stumped for Bishop on Wednesday prior to the debate, along with Fox News panelist Kimberly Guilfoyle. They were in Monroe.
We need to get Dan in there. We need to fight to preserve North Carolina. This is going to be a big state for us in 2020.
Evidently, Don Jr. and Guilfoyle spent most of their time there talking about the national road ahead, with this being the first battle in the race to the White House in 2020. What other bon mots did they share?
I mean, Don Jr., he did, right, he came in not knowing a whole lot about either Dan. He did get their names correct, and it's kind of like when you're the, doing the...
Fail-proof.
You're a band on the tour and you say hello Cleveland and you're really
Right.
in Chicago, so you got that right. But,
Spinal Tap reference. He gets $1 for that.
Don, Dan. All right.
but it was really we need Dan Bishop because, he'll fight for us and he'll fight for my father.
Yeah.
We need to win 2020, et cetera. So not a whole lot about the race, just a lot about next year.
So Donald Trump Jr. said, quote, "This special election has sort of sneaked by people." Really?
In Washington.
The other side is motivated by nothing other than hate, but hate is a powerful motivator. He, of course, is referring to Democrats and others' distaste for his father. Dan Bishop supports the president and his policies. The president will be coming to stump for Bishop in Fayetteville on election eve. Given the president's declining popularity, will this contest likely be a canary in the coal mine in terms of predicting what will happen in 2020 nationally?
Well, I think at minimum, a lot of us in the media are going to say that, and it does have a lot of the themes and issues. Remember, this is a district that Trump won by 12 points, give or take, in 2016. So I think it does give you at least some clues as to the mood.
You can also envision what Republicans will say, though, if they lose the seat. Dan McCready had 27 months to introduce himself to voters. He had
A
high
lot more
name
money.
recognition, a lot more money.
Yeah, when he said he'd been running on that debate on television, he said he'd been running for 27 months. I thought, is that right? Really?
Yeah, that's
Doesn't it
right.
seem like 27 years at this point?
Right.
Well, okay, when we come back, we had several other candidates in town this week. We'll talk about them. We'll talk about the Mecklenburgh County Board of Elections and voting machines and barcodes and other things, including the Katz Center redevelopment and much, much more. It's Charlotte Talks on the Local News Roundup on 90.7 WFAE. Oh, and the RNC bus tour. Yeah, we'll talk about that too. Support for Charlotte Talks comes from WFAE members and the Foundation Fighting Blindness. Charlotte Vision Seminar featuring scientific advancements, clinical trials, and more. September 14th. More at givefightingblindness.org/Charlotte Vision Seminar. Coming up in 20 minutes at 10 o'clock, the Roundup continues with a slant on national and international news. On 1A, Hurricane Dorian is headed to America and scheduled to hit Florida over the Labor Day weekend. Senator Kirsten Gillibrand is the latest to drop out of the presidential race, who made the cut for the next debate. They'll talk about that. They'll talk about a lot of other things as well. Joshua Johnson and his panel of journalists cover those stories and more coming up on 1A at 10. And we'll continue our coverage of our local and regional events in just a moment.
There is so much more to the news than covering what just happened, like new insights.
The research suggests that alcohol reduces the amount of time you can spend in the sun before you get a burn.
Different perspectives, and even some laughs.
It was a Bob Ross flash mob, a flash bob, if you will.
For news and stories you'll talk about all day, listen to Morning Edition from NPR News.
I'm Lisa Worf. Listen each weekday morning from 5 to 9 on 90.7 WFAE.
It's Charlotte Talks on WFAE and WFHE. I'm Mike Collins. The local news roundup features Steve Harrison from WFAE News, Eric Spanberg from the Charlotte Business Journal, and Joe Bruno from WSSC-TV Channel 9 Eyewitness News. It's a long title. So the president's son was here to stump for Dan Bishop, but former Vice President Joe Biden was also here this week as well, and he released an endorsement statement to Spectrum News for Dan McCready, saying, quote, "McCready is precisely the kind of leader that North Carolina deserves, one who will put the country over party, who has brought jobs to his community, and who will protect coverage for those with pre-existing conditions." He hit all the hot-button issues. Will that endorsement be helpful?
I mean, I think, it
won't hurt.
It won't hurt. I think it's expected, right? That Donald Trump is going to endorse Dan Bishop,
Right.
and Joe Biden will endorse Dan McCready. I don't think there's any surprise there. I think those voters are aligned with those respective candidates.
So Biden was at a fundraiser at the home of Erskine and Crandall Bowles. Erskine Bowles used to be, the chief of staff for President Clinton, I
Correct.
believe, yeah, and also ran the UNC system here in North Carolina. Democratic presidential candidate Beto O'Rourke was here campaigning and made an appearance at a very different place, also opposite our candidate debate.
What were they thinking?
I don't know. He was at Armored Cow Brewing.
Probably hurt turnout.
Armored Cow Brewing in the university area. The first time he was here, just a few weeks ago, he was at CPCC. Clearly, he's going after younger voters.
He was at Amelie's in Rock Hill, too, before
Really?
that.
That's
Okay,
right.
younger voters.
Yes.
And smaller places than the vice. Well, although I guess the Crandall Bowles home is
Their house isn't that big,
no,
is
it's
it?
not that big, I don't think. But he spoke at Armored Cow Brewing, and he answered questions about climate change, student debt, racism, and gun control. This is Beto. He was invited there by the founder of UNC Charlotte's March for Our Lives group after the deadly shooting on campus this year.
If we're going to save the lives of our fellow Americans and fellow human beings, we buy back the AR-15s and AK-47s that are out on the street right now.
So it sounds like the entire crowd was applauding there. How big was the crowd at that event?
I think there was about 150. They were out on the patio.
What's he in the polls right now? Is he 1 or
2, 3, 4%.
Made it to the September debates.
Did make it to the debates. Yeah, that's right.
Biden also spoke on Wednesday at town halls in Spartanburg and Gaffney, and he talked about the great damage he believes the president was doing to the country, and, quote, "The only way it stops is if we invite the country and say enough. Enough." Is that a message that resonates in Gaffney and Spartanburg?
So he was also in Rock Hill yesterday.
Clinton College yesterday. Yeah.
And, it was interesting because, there's been a lot of stuff written in the national media kind of about, Biden's ahead, but people really, they're all just so lukewarm on him, and only he's ahead because people think he can win. So at the Rock Hill event, I was there, people were really engaged. I mean, they were really excited, and I think there was a connection there. So I think there's a little bit more than just, oh, he's the former vice president, I think he can win. I mean, the people I talked to were still not ready to vote for him. They were just totally looking at this like, who's the best candidate to beat the president. But I thought it was interesting that there was some energy in the room that you don't hear about very often.
And also, I mean, it's been said, but probably is worth repeating, he has a lot of history in South Carolina. And he has a lot of close connections with African-American voters, Democrats in South Carolina. So there's a reason that he's there all the time.
What does it mean that these candidates are here at this point in the campaign when Beto O'Rourke just squeaked into the next television debate and other Democrats are falling by the wayside? What does it mean that he's spending time here, or that Joe Biden is spending time here? Elizabeth Warren, I think, has been here, but she's not spending a lot of time here yet.
I think the thing about Charlotte is that, you have South Carolina is February 29th, right? And then North Carolina is a week later. But it's so easy, obviously, to hop. You go into Rock Hill, you hop into Charlotte, or vice versa. And I think that's really what's going on.
Beto O'Rourke, I think, is still trying to find his groove, find his niche. That's why he's spending time at a place where young people hang out. As far as Joe Biden goes, I think it's smart for him to target South Carolina because South Carolina is a state where African-American turnout will decide the election. And the sole reason Biden is in first right now in all of the polls is because of African-American support.
Okay. South Carolina will be number 4, right?
Yes.
Iowa, New Hampshire, Nevada.
So last week, the State Elections Board caused some controversy over the machines they have decided to allow voters to use in 2020 because evidently the whole thing was about making sure our elections will be secure and that if there's a problem with the voting, we have a paper trail. And even the Democratic head of the Board of Elections allowed this machine that produces a barcode instead of a human-readable trail. He let that go through. So this week, Mecklenburgh County Board of Elections has announced a public demonstration of the 3 machines approved by the state. Mecklenburgh gets to choose which one they'll use. Why are they having this public demonstration? Are they demonstrating all 3?
Correct.
Why?
Because
are we voting on this? And if so, which machine do I use?
The Board of Elections will decide which machine, how voters will cast their ballot in 2020. And after the Board of Elections chooses which software they want to use, it will go before the county commission to have the official sign off because they're the ones who have to pay for it.
Okay. As I said, one of these machines is controversial because it produces a barcode that can be read by a machine, but not a human. And there's concern that the machine can be manipulated to read the barcode the way the machine or the person programming the machine wants it to. So given that the whole purpose of changing is to go to a paper trail that can be documented, which machine is Mecklenburgh likely to choose?
That's a good question. With the barcode ballot machine, it uses something called a ballot marking device, which is similar to what we have now, the touch screens. The ballot marking device lets all voters fill out a ballot whether or not they have a disability. So I think that will be an argument that we hear from Mecklenburgh County if they decide to go with these barcode machines. The voting rights activists are very much against these machines because they produce that barcode, and the voter can't verify that that's the barcode for Donald Trump or Val Lyles or Elizabeth Warren or whoever. You pick a candidate, insert it there. And then also there's the hacking concerns as well.
Right. So 2 years ago, when we talked about the security of our voting systems, of these electronic voting machines, everybody on the voting side, on the municipal side, not just here, but around the country, was saying, oh, these are perfectly safe. Then we talked to this professor who had a first-year freshman student hack into a voting machine in 30 seconds and change the vote. So clearly, they're not secure. Why are we even talking about this anymore? Why isn't it paper ballots, done with it?
The county will have that opportunity.
One of the things that came up in those conversations, though, was that several of these voting machine manufacturers are connected heavily to one political party over the other. How much of a role is that playing?
Well, that's a good question.
All right.
That's a good question.
The whole thing stinks. Charlotte Area Transit System has chosen a partner for the potential redevelopment of the main bus station downtown on Trade Street. The current transit center was built in 1995, which means it has to go. It's old.
It's older than Bank of America Stadium.
Right. It's a little more than a carport on steroids. So what does CATS want to replace it with? And given the redevelopment will include offices and retail and more, is CATS going to be part of this? Are they making money on this? How's this working?
CATS is going to be part of it in the sense that there will still be a bus station transit center incorporated into this in some way. I think what's going on here is really a function of market forces. That is, the
land's too valuable.
The land is too valuable, and you look at it, it's right next to the arena. There's all this development sprouting up around Uptown, and a developer went to the city and said, hey, I would like to do something. That triggered request for proposal, and interestingly enough, the original developer that wanted to do this was not the one that was selected. It's a tag team of White Point Partners, which is a Charlotte firm, and Dart Interests out of Texas. So they now will talk with the city and see if they can strike a deal.
Okay, so it's not at the deal stage yet.
Correct.
I think one thing that's I'm just going to say that's interesting is the location of the bus station today is fantastic, right?
Yes.
It's right across from the arena, and they're going to keep bus service there. That's the plan. But CATS wants to do a huge expansion of its bus network, have a lot more buses, a lot more frequency. I'm not sure where the buses are going to go. I mean, there's no room. I don't see there's probably being room in that new development for a lot more service.
Well, I should mention there are two proposals that these two developers have floated so far. One of them would put the buses on adjacent property, some of which they own and some of which I think the state owns. But let's remember this. So the bus terminal as it is now obviously is essentially just a transit center with a little bit of a couple shops in there. But you have the Gateway station that's coming up that will have bus service. That will take some of the burden off of this area. Then you also have John Lewis and CATS have reworked the structure of how the bus network runs. That is, they don't want to funnel everyone into Uptown because it takes too long, a 90-minute transfer. So I think those two factors are really important because then what that means, Mike, is you don't need as many buses as part of that project, which leaves it more as a real estate play than a transit play.
Okay. We are 1 year out, ladies and gentlemen, from the Republican National Convention in Charlotte, and on Tuesday morning, convention organizers kicked off a 3-day, 6-city bus tour, oh joy, across the state. Scott Stone, former Mecklenburgh County State Representative and current candidate for Lieutenant Governor, was on the bus and spoke to NBC Charlotte about the tour.
The urgency being hosted by Charlotte in 2020 is not just about Charlotte, it's about the whole Carolinas. And by the bus tour coming to all these cities, it's reminding everyone, hey, we want you involved.
City Council Republican Ed Driggs was the lone representative from the city at the bus kickoff, and you were there, Eric. Did you ride the bus with them?
I did not ride the bus.
Where did they go? What did they see? Who did they speak with?
They left from Charlotte to go to Winston-Salem, and then they went to a variety of cities in North and South Carolina over the next 3 days. And one of the things that struck me, of course, this is a Democratic majority city, but they waited until Monday evening to put out the press release of this tour starting in Charlotte, and it was really just media people and a few politically involved people. So that was one thing that struck me immediately, and it will be interesting. John Laster, who runs the local host group, was asked about the idea of finding 8,000 volunteers in a city that is made up of mostly Democrats, and his answer was, look, I think it's people that take pride in their city and want to promote Charlotte, not necessarily the Republican agenda, but how do you create interest in a city that is so heavily Democratic, I think is what I took away from that.
One of the purposes of this trip is they stopped at a lot of different college campuses and they spoke to college Republicans. So I think they're hoping that, it will be a regional volunteer pool and that these college students might be able to fill in some of that gap.
One of the at-large candidates in our forum on Wednesday night here at WFAE warned that if trouble results from our hosting this convention, we would be forever remembered as the place that hosted bigotry, and that would cause us all kinds of problems down the road. But Marcia Lee Kelly, the president and CEO of the Republican National Convention, said at the kickoff that we should, quote, just celebrate that Charlotte is a nonpartisan rock star. We've got the Republicans, we've got the Democrats, we have 15,000 members of the media coming. This is a good thing for the region. And there it is, another illustration of our country's deep divide. So, though Mayor Lyles was the point person on bringing this convention to town, making it happen, this is the second event that she did not attend. She didn't attend the unveiling of the Charlotte Republican logo.
Yes.
She wasn't there for the bus tour.
That's what I was going to mention, Mike. And I think, Steve, maybe Joe was there too. Last October, there was an event where they announced the convention dates. You remember this?
That was at the convention center.
At the convention center, and Mayor Lyles was on the stage. Braxton Winston attended, Larkin Eggleston. So you had a fair number of local Democrats, and that has not continued. That has basically vanished since that vote last summer. And we know that the mayor had already said she was not going to speak, at the convention to welcome everyone. But it is noticeable, it is striking that you're not getting that bipartisan buy-in in terms of just promoting Charlotte having this now.
What I wonder is if after September 10th they come back.
Well, that's a very good question.
Okay. Saturday is a big day for people who live at Lake Arbor Apartments. The Lake Arbor Apartments saga continues. They are they're apartments for low-income individuals, and they're being refurbished, and tenants are being asked to leave. Many by the end of the year, but a lot of them are being asked to leave tomorrow, Saturday. If you're listening on Saturday, it's today. Channel 9 has been investigating the Lake Arbor apartments for years. What about those apartments? What did you find?
So come Saturday, 78 families in different units will have to vacate the property, the premises. These apartments, the Lake Arbor apartments, have been just in terrible condition for many years. Mold, rats, residents complaining about the conditions to the landlord not taking care of the units. So the landlord was basically like, okay, everyone has to get out so I can do renovations. And now that's creating massive displacement amongst hundreds of families at a time when affordable housing is limited in Charlotte. The United Way has stepped up. They're trying to raise $350,000 for these families because that is what nonprofits and the Housing Justice Coalition have estimated that will cost for these families to get back on their feet. As of now, I believe about $8,500, $9,000 has been raised. So Saturday, or today, if you're listening on Saturday, there are going to be people out at Lake Arbor. There's going to be moving trucks, housing advocates trying to help these people get out of their conditions.
Do we know where they're going?
Unfortunately, a lot of people do not know where they're going. They do not have their housing locked down. The Southern Comfort Inn has partnered with the Housing Justice Coalition to provide a discounted rate.
And we have 30 seconds left. As Channel 9 pointed out, displacement at this level is not new to Charlotte. In 2013, residents of the Silver Oak Apartments on Monroe Road were ordered to move, but now that site is home to luxury apartments. When these improvements are completed at Lake Arbor, will they still be affordable housing units?
Unfortunately, we do not know that.
Why don't we know that?
The landlord has not been exactly accessible to the media or to the people who live there.
Who is the landlord?
An out-of-state landlord.
New York? All right, that's all the time we have. You get to the bottom of that, come back and tell us, please. Joe Bruno, reporter for WSOC TV News, Eric Spanberg, managing editor of the Charlotte Business Journal, and Steve Harrison with WFAE News. Thank you all for the hour.